Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into the studio for this week's installment in my ever-growing video library of everything sculpting. We're back in the studio and normally we would be continuing the Patreon exclusive video series on the portrait today. However, due to unfortunate circumstances, I had to travel home to Norway and didn't have time to edit or sculpt this last week. So, the Patreon video on the skull will be next week. And this week you'll get a video on everyone's favorite subject, sculpting feet. I have the rough beginnings of a foot blocked in here. Let me talk a little bit about that first. There are a few misconceptions about the foot that you should look out for and pay attention to. Number one, a foot is much taller than you would think it to be. The best way to observe this is to get down on the floor and observe a foot from down there, where the foot actually is. You'll instantly see the wedge shape that is the foot, going from thicker at the ankle where the foot meets the calf and becoming thinner towards the toes. And it's quite substantial. The high point of this wedge is not in the middle of the foot. It favors the inside of the foot, which means that the turn from the high point down towards the inside of the foot is much steeper and happens much faster than on the outside of the foot. This becomes more pronounced the closer to the toes we get. It's a little less obvious where the foot meets the calf. The ankle bones are offset in height from each other. The inside ankle bone sits higher than the outside ankle bone. Check on yourself and you'll see this right away. Representing this not only helps make your sculpture lifelike, but also helps move the viewer's eye. Offset high points on either side of the leg really helps whoever looks at your work and helps move their eye up and down the leg. It adds rhythm and gesture to what could otherwise be a stiff stick looking thing. Offsetting the high point in the ankle helps, but you should look for as many of these offset high points as you can while sculpting the legs, and you'll find them all up and down the leg. And the arms for that matter. Final thing has to do with how the foot meets the ground. Imagine that there is a fat pad underneath the foot that squishes outwards while under pressure from the weight of the body. On the outside of the foot, this fat pad travels from the heel almost all the way up to the pinky toe. On the inside, the arch of the foot is much more apparent and this fat pad has a gap in the middle to accommodate the arching of the foot. The fat pad on the inside of the foot is obvious around the heel and further forward right behind the big toe, with a big gap in the middle for the arch. In addition, the toes have fat pads themselves that compress against the ground. The toes are a big part of the foot and a pretty important detail. I'm not going to be getting into the details of the toes here because of the scale, more on that a little bit later. The shape of the toes is interesting, however. As you probably have noticed if you've watched any of my other videos, I like to use metaphors or abstracting the qualities of the body, describing them with words so that I, and hopefully you as well, can understand them better and understand what it is that's going on. So let's do that with the toes. Let's assign them some abstract values. The big toe can be thought of as a ramp. It points upwards. Visually, this is represented by making sure the shadow underneath the big toe, especially from the front view, is longer and softer. A long and soft shadow means a long and slow turn of the form. The rest of the toes can be thought about as a hand grasping for something, or perhaps the claws of a bird curling around a branch. They aim down towards the ground in a much more strong way than the big toe. Where the big toe is proud, the other four smaller toes are submissive. They clutch the ground while the big toe looks to the sky. This is represented by having these four smaller toes have much shorter and sharper shadows underneath them. You'll see this whenever the camera moves to the front of the foot. I'm not going to be sculpting really detailed toes here. Later on in the series, you'll see me spend considerable time detailing the face and hands, however. So why is that? The feet are not a focal point. While they serve an important role in telling the story of the action that Kronos is performing, they are not where I want people to spend their attention. There are many different tools we as sculptors can employ to draw and hold the viewer's attention. Contrast is one of the key words. Contrast between light and dark, contrast in edge quality, contrast in the amount of detail sculpted. All these things help draw the eye. The more contrast, the more attention something catches. Sharp edges catches a lot of attention as well. Those are reserved only for where it makes complete sense and around the eyes and the face, as I really want people to look there. Because the head is at the top of the sculpture, we get some help getting a higher light and dark contrast there. In most cases, we're going to have the light be coming from above, from the top, and so the head will catch the most light. Think of the fall of light in a drawing, except here in sculpture it happens by default, if you have the head at the top of the sculpture, that is. So that leaves us with details. More details means more attention is required by the viewer to parse through all the visual information. Feet do actually have a ton of details. Veins, bones, flesh. There's a lot to be potentially explored in a foot. But in this scale and for this sculpture, it's not necessary and might even be a mistake, in my opinion. There is certainly some personal preference playing a big role here. This sculpture being a design maquette is not meant to have all the fine details worked out anyways. Those will be worked out in the larger scale. And I don't want to be spending tons of time fussing over small details in a foot. This sculpture is already taken long enough. So it's not fitting, really, to be sculpting a lot of details in this feet, considering the purpose of this sculpture. Then the other consideration is scale. When we compress the scale, shrink the scale down into smaller versus larger, I think it becomes much more necessary to compress the amount of information as well. You have to pick and choose where you apply details a little more carefully. At larger scales, a foot sculpted like the one you see in this video is going to look out of place. In this scale, however, it does not. Exactly why that is, I'm not sure. Perhaps this small scale is so far removed from life that our eyes just fill in the missing details. I don't know. So what details are important? Obviously, shape and size are very important. I want to give it enough detail so it reads like a detailed foot. And you can probably notice that there is some anatomical information in this foot, even though it's somewhat simplified. The big toe is separated from the smaller toes in a more obvious fashion, while the rest of the toes are only truly separated by the quality of how the tip meets the ground. In addition, I have tried to add soft transitions into planes of shadow where it is appropriate. Notice the soft shadow right above the tips of the 4 smaller toes hinting at the toe knuckles, and the next shadow above that indicating where the toes meet the body of the foot. Subtle information keeps the feet interesting enough. They'll read like feet, look like feet from a distance. Yet these feet are only going to be a visual illusion of what a foot actually is, which doesn't attract too much attention and keeps the eye of the viewer moving to more important areas of the piece. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, consider liking it and subscribing to the channel for more videos. I put out a new video every Thursday, so stay tuned for next week. If you want to support the channel, visit the link to my Patreon page in the description below the video to learn how. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.